This is a hidden problem that's costing nonprofits thousands or maybe millions of dollars. So I'm Karen Kendrick, Senior Director of Client Engagement here at Veritus, and I'll be working behind the scenes as Jeff shares more about this topic with you today. So before we get started, I want to make sure you know how to use the webinar system. You'll notice there is a chat box, and I hope you all will start putting in where you're from, what org you're with. We'd love to say hi and see where everyone is joining us. We've got a big crowd, like 800 people for this webinar. And then you'll notice there's a Q&A box, and that's a great spot for you to put your questions. And that helps me because when we get a lot going in the chat, I'll miss a question. So I want you to stick your questions in the Q&A box. And then you can chat away and make comments and talk about stuff and help each other out in the chat box as we go along. And just a reminder that we'll be sending you a link to the recording and a copy of the slides after this webinar this afternoon. So you'll be able to share that with others as we go along. So now let's begin the webinar. Jeff, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Okay, everyone, this is me. I'm principal and owner of Veritus Group, and I've been doing this a long time, over 30 some years in fundraising, worked 8 years in the nonprofit space as a development director, and learned a lot of stuff from how to do direct mail all the way to how to solicit a major gift. And then I worked for an agency, a direct response agency, for 12, 13 years, working with some very large nonprofits, and really had honed my skill on direct response fundraising. And then for the last 15 years, started with Richard and I back in 2009. In my living room, we rebranded his personal consulting work on major gifts to Veritus Group. And we've been going ever since. And I love it. And this is one of my favorite webinars to give, because it has absolutely the most impact on you and your organization. And hopefully it will illuminate for you some problems that are out in our sector and in your file, and ways that we can rectify that. So here are the big objectives for this today.
So quickly, yeah. Jeff, I'm not seeing slides. So are you thinking there's slides?
Yeah, you're not seeing slides.
I thought you were just going to do a nice little intro without slides for a minute. So I think you stopped sharing without realizing it.
Let's make sure. Are you seeing it now?
Nope. You were showing it just a minute ago.
Yeah.
So we'll figure it out here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead and pop your information in the chat box. And
other people say they can see it, so it's just you.
Oh, interesting.
You're the problem, Karen. Not everyone else.
Always the problem.
Okay.
You all can see the slides. That's so crazy. This is a first. All right. There we go.
You all can see these. All right. So here are the objectives. We're going to discuss some of the significant problems that have caused the nonprofit sector to lose their way. We're going to understand the areas you need to focus on within your data, and how you can begin assessing your own donor file to identify issues that are impacting you. And then learn some tools that you can use to catch those red flags within your donor file. All right. So a little bit about Veritus Group. For those that don't know and are on this call, there's a lot of you, which is really exciting. And some of you may not know about us. But at Veritus, we're really passionate about relationship-focused fundraising that's grounded in a data-driven approach. So if you've known us for a while, you know we talk about data all the time. Data drives strategy. It drives how many people should be working with major donors. All of that drives those mid, major, and plan-giving strategies in order to help you build relationships with donors. And we've been doing this work for so many years, and we've worked with so many different nonprofits. We've analyzed millions of donor records. We've consulted with hundreds of clients, and we've trained thousands, over 6,000 people over the last several years, major gift fundraising, mid-level fundraising, and about plan giving. And all of that learning we've applied to our webinars, to our consulting work, so that it's all based on actual work that we've done and knowledge that we can pass on to you and inspire you. These are some of the clients we've worked with currently and in the past. Just to give you a little sampling, some of them are large, some of them are very small. They're not all large organizations that we work with. In fact, that's the beauty of what we get to do, is we get to work with small organizations and large organizations. Okay, let's get into this. So I feel like we've lost our way in the nonprofit sector. Here are some of the problems. Many mid and major plan giving programs, what I feel, are rudderless, and they're in need of real leadership that understands this. Nonprofits are struggling with high donor and donor value attrition rates. We know this, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Fundraising talent is turning over at extremely high rates. Internal cultures and advancement opportunities lack inclusion. There's a lack of understanding around mid and major and planned giving programs within the nonprofit leadership. They just don't get it. And we as a sector, I feel, have really lost our way, forgetting what our missions are all about. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So I really believe the mission has 3 legs to it. One is, of course, the thing that you're doing to help change the world, right? It's that thing. And, every nonprofit has started with someone or a group of people that saw a problem and said, we've got to fix it. And they start a nonprofit, and this is their mission. However, the minute that we hire someone or we ask someone to volunteer to help you carry out that mission, and the minute that you ask for $1 or more to help you carry that mission out, your mission expands to not only the thing that you're doing that's changing the world, but to your staff and to your donors. And most nonprofits don't get that. And so what happens is we run over staff, we burn them out, we look at donors as ATM machines or as a means to an end. We don't look at them as fully a part of the mission. We don't take care of our people, our staff, and we don't take care of our donors. And so we've lost our way there. Now, talking about donors, I want to focus in on understanding attrition. Donor attrition, which almost all of you have heard about, are donor retention, and donor value attrition. And that's something we don't talk often about, because really not many people are tracking donor value attrition. So donor attrition, a lot of people are talking about that. We all know it's a serious problem in our industry. We can't hold on to donors. They're going away. And so we're acquiring all these people and we're trying to cultivate them, but we're not doing a good job and they're leaving. And so you go to any conference, everyone's trying to talk about how do we retain more of our donors. The for-profit industry is doing a much better job than the nonprofit industry, and we haven't yet really figured this out, donor retention. But there's another thing I want to raise, and that's donor value retention. And donor value retention, or attrition, is really about donors either going away or donors giving less. And many times we're talking about donor attrition or donor retention, we talk about it in percentages. Well, we've lost over the last 4 years 40% of our donors. And everyone's like, oh, that's too bad. But no one actually thinks about the revenue associated with losing 40% of your donors. Donor value attrition actually puts a number to it. And that makes it different in our psyche. Once we realize how much money we're losing, then we're like, oh, this is a problem. So here's an example. This is one portfolio that we looked at. One major gift portfolio of 150 names, donors. Year one, these donors gave $1.9 million. That's a really good, solid portfolio, $1.9 million. However, those same donors by year three now are only giving $584,000, or we lost almost 70% of their value from year one to year three. Now, you could just say, well, we lost 30% to donor attrition. 30% of our donors went away. But if you actually put a figure to that and realize we've lost almost $1.4 million from year one to year three in one portfolio, it hits harder, doesn't it? This is what's going on. Here's another way to look at value attrition, donor value attrition. Most nonprofits, leaders, the development directors, they look at your mid and major gift program, bottom line numbers, right? So you're doing well if you're increasing year over year. And if you look at view number one, donors for 1,000 plus cum gave $2.5 million to this organization. In year two, $3.1 million. So overall, this organization from the 1,000 plus donors grew 21% in 1 year. So if you're the executive director or the development director, you're doing cartwheels down the hallway, right? Because this is pretty good growth. Well, what we want to do at Veritus is kind of peel the onion back a little bit. And what I want to do is look at what we see in view two. I want to look at the donors that gave in year one, that 2.56 million. What did those same donors give in year two? $1.3 million, or we lost 49% of the value in 1 year. They either stopped giving or they gave less. That's $1.25 million that went away. Now, the only reason this grew overall is because new donors giving 1,000 plus cum level came in almost at 1.8 million and masked the behavior of those donors that came from year one. So if you're only looking at bottom line numbers, you're thinking everything is great. And that's how everyone is looking at their file. What they're not looking at is those donors that gave in year one, how did they do in year two? How are they going to do in year three? No one's looking at that. And that's what I want us to focus on. Here's another example from an organization, and I'll walk you through this. In year one, this organization brought in $20 million overall, and by year three, $23.3 million. They grew by almost 17% over 3 years. So not bad growth, right? You would be pretty happy with that. In fact, they were pretty happy with this. But then we broke it down. We broke it down by individuals and organizations and by year, class year, to really look at the value attrition rates going on. Okay? And you can see, if we just focused on the individual class year, in year one, they gave 10.5 million. Those same donors by year three gave 7.5. The class year of two, these are new donors hitting that 1,000 plus mark, $3.1 million. The next year, those same donors only gave 1.7, or we lost 44% of their value. And then you can see organizations that they had. That included foundations, corporations, anyone that was not an individual, and it's very similar loss. So if you add up the total loss to value attrition from year one to year three, that equaled $9.1 million. Now, when we showed that to the CEO, he was blown away. He had no idea. Why? Because remember, they grew by 17% from year one to year three. So they're thinking, hey, we're doing okay. And then they realize, oh my gosh, we've lost $9.1 million to value attrition. So the CEO asked a really good question at that point. He said, if we could just reduce the value attrition by half, that's another $4.5 million we could have for a program, right? Exactly. So the question is, why do they have this high value attrition? What are they doing with their donors that they're going away, either giving less or just going away. Some of the other things we find in our assessment, and this is what we found in this particular file, a lot of donors giving the same amount. So they had a lot of faithful, valuable donors giving the same amount every year, 2,000, and others that were giving 25,000, same year over year giving. So they were giving the same, and we saw just tons of these donors, very loyal, but giving the same. So when you ask what's going on, you could guess. No one is asking these donors to give more, or it's a membership program, or it's a sustainer program, and no one is trying to, get them to give more, or they haven't been asked to do any more. So they've been giving the same amount over and over and over. Now, why is all of this happening? What is going on with these files? And here's a very big reason. I want you to look at the orange section. So the donor's saying this to us. Hey, look, you made me aware of a problem, and you asked me to help and said that it's going to make a big difference. And the donor's saying, I believed you, and I gave what I could. Now, this is where the organization can make one of two ways to go. Either they do a really good job and they told that donor how their gift made a difference to close the loop from the gift, which then the donor wants to continue, or, which most organizations do, is they don't really tell the donor how their gift made a difference, and so the donor goes somewhere else. This is a big reason why we see donor value attrition rates that are really, really bad. Because we didn't do a good job of telling how they made a difference, they go somewhere else. This is the number one reason why donors leave organizations. They're saying, I wrote you this check. It made a difference to me to give you that money, and I never found out what happened. I hear that over and over again. Now, this particular slide, I show this slide all the time when I'm at conferences. And I look in the faces of those who view that slide while I'm saying it, and I can tell that they're like, yeah, okay, we know this. We know we're supposed to report on impact. Yeah, everyone knows this. I want to focus here a little bit because this is so important. I'm going to tell you a story. So a couple of years ago, I was on a small little plane headed from Dallas to Midland, Texas, the oil country. And I was actually going to speak at an AFP conference there. So I'm sitting in the seat, plane is boarding, and in walks this very tall, big gentleman, dirty kind of jeans, shirt, dirty fingernails, sits down next to me. And this guy is really chatty. And he's sitting down and, he's like, so what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I get to work with organizations to help develop major gift programs. And he's like, oh, major gifts. He goes, I've made a few of those major gifts in my time. And then that's why I was like, first of all, never judge a book by a cover. So while I thought he was probably working in the oil fields, and it turned out he actually owned a couple of them. All right. So here I am in a plane. I have 1 hour to fly, and I'm in heaven because I'm with a donor, and this is what I do. So I'm like, oh, I got to ask this guy some questions. So the first question I asked him was this: tell me about your experience of giving major gifts to organizations. And he looked at me and he goes, Jeff, you know what? No one's ever asked me that question. And he thought about it a little bit, and he said, you know what? I have one that's really positive and one that's terrible. And I was like, all right, I want to hear the really terrible one first. So this is what he said to me. He said, I gave a gift of $1.5 million to the university that I went to. And it was very specific. He gave $1.5 million to help fund the wide receiver coach's office in a new athletic complex that this university was building. I'm like, wow, that's really specific. Why did you give that money? And he had a whole story. He was like, when I was in high school, I played wide receiver, and that experience was one of the best that I've ever had. And it was so great to be on a team. I loved it. I wasn't good enough to play in college, but that experience of being on a team and playing wide receiver was amazing for me. And that's what I wanted to do. And I said, that's a really cool thing. And that's why he wanted to fund these wide receiver coaches' office. So I said, okay, why was this such a bad, terrible experience? This is what happened. He said, I gave that 1.5 million, and in the mail, I get this short little letter saying, thank you for your gift of $1.5 million to the wide receivers coaches. We really appreciate it. Signed, blah, blah, blah. And that was it. That was it. I said, wait a minute. You didn't get a call. You didn't, the office and say, hey, come and see this. He goes, nothing, Jeff. I saw nothing but that. He said, in fact, I was going to be in business down where the university is. So I called them and said, hey, could I see the wide receivers offices when it was all done? And they're like, oh yeah, come on down. We'll show you around. So he goes down there, and they put some freshman on him to kind of tour him around. And the freshman has no idea who he is or what he really did. He's just showing them the athletic complex. No wide receivers coaches came out to say anything. The head coach, nothing. He said, I was just like, I can't believe it. I just wanted to make a connection with somebody at that university that seemed to care. And no one cared that I gave that $1.5 million. And he said, Jeff, if you knew how much money that I was going to give in my estate to this university, you'd be blown away. But they're not getting it anymore. And I was like, wow, this is an example. And you might think, oh, this is extreme. This doesn't happen. This happens over and over. I have so many stories, but this one is important because the good one. Now I'll tell you the good story. He said, okay, I gave another $1.5 million to a veterans organization in my hometown. They were building a new building for where the veterans could go. I'm not kidding you, Jeff. I got 5 letters thanking me for this gift. 3 of them were from veterans, and they told me their stories. And he said, I'm not someone that cries, but I was just bawling when I read these letters of how important this building was going to be to them and what a difference it was going to make in their life. And then they invited me to the opening of this thing, and they said, bring all your family. So I brought cousins, I brought everyone that I knew in the area to come to this event, and it was amazing. They talked about the importance of the building, my gift, all the stuff. It meant so much to be there. And once a month, I get a call from the CEO, just checking in with me, just saying, how's it going? Or sometimes I see him when I'm down there and I'm visiting with the guys. It's something I love. And they have no idea because I haven't told them yet, but they are getting the bulk of my estate when I die, and it's going to blow them away. And I was like, this is an example. I just want you all to internalize how important it is to report back to donors how their gifts make a difference. Whether it's $1,000 or 1.5 million or $10 million. This is important stuff. And it doesn't have to be some expensive thing that you do, and all. Just getting back to a donor and telling them how their gift made a difference makes a difference. Okay, here's some more things to keep your eyes on about keeping your donors and serving them well. You really want to look at the number of donors who give the same amount annually. This is a key in your donor file. If you've got a bunch of donors giving the same amount every year, that means no one is challenging or asking that donor to do anything more. There's an opportunity there. You want to track those issues with new money covering up the old money, right? Remember that 21% growth? Well, that new money covered up the old money. You want to look at that. When there's too much focus on securing new money from new donors, you get this from executive directors. I want us to bring in new donors. I want, more money. I don't care about the old donors. Yes, you do care about those old donors are the ones, if you nurture them well, are going to be giving the high 6-7 figure gifts years from now. And then you want to make sure that your organization has a system that supports reporting back on impact. Most organizations, when I go in there and look at it, they're not doing that. They have no infrastructure set up. They have no relationship with program. There's nothing where finance, program, and development are working together on creating a system that is able to show feedback to the donor on their gifts. That must be done. Okay, here's another thing to really think about. And this is really making sure that your pipeline from that first gift to the last gift that they make in their estate you make it as easy as possible for a donor to move through this pipeline. And you need to look and examine through this pipeline from donor acquisition, your general cultivation, mid-level, major gifts, planned gifts. What are the barriers that prevent a donor who loves your organization from giving to their heart's content? What are those barriers? And you're like, well, I don't know. For example, do you have a mid-level program? A lot of nonprofits do not have a mid-level program. That's a barrier because you're not moving those donors, moving them in from a direct response, hands-off approach to a more, there's somebody that cares about me. There's somebody that's noticing I'm giving higher gifts. To major gifts. Some organizations really have no major gift program. You would not believe it. They have the acquisition and the general cultivation thing down. They spent millions of dollars on that program and very little in major gifts. So that's a barrier. So there's no place for that donor to go. So you see that all the time. That's why you're seeing gifts of $5,000 every year. Why? Because there's really no one reaching out to that donor. They're just being cultivated like a $25 donor. There could be internal things. You could have a membership program or department, and then you have philanthropy over on the other side. I've seen this happen over and over, especially, and I'm just going to call it out, there's a lot of public media, there's a lot of arts organizations that have membership, and they look at members differently than they would as donors. And so they don't think of them as donors. They think of them as members. And so what they do, instead of using membership as a strategy, they create a whole department out of members. And then they develop KPIs around membership, building up the membership. And so when you introduce a mid-level program to a heavy membership organization, those people in membership are like, hey, you can't have my donors. Our numbers are going to look bad. That's a barrier. That's a barrier of allowing donors to move through. So what are those barriers in your organization that prevent donors from moving up as easily as possible in your organization? One of those things we talk about, mid-level. So mid-level is a big clog point because a lot of organizations do not have a mature mid-level program. And so what we see are clogs in the cum giving levels and the number of donors in those levels from moving up. And I'll show another example, but mid-level is a big area where there's a clog and what we're preventing donors from being able to really move up through the organization. So what do nonprofits need to do to address some of these issues again, more around donor value attrition? I'm going to say it again, regularly and promptly report back on impact. Be committed to learning the donor's passions and interests. build trust between the organization and the donor, and then connect the donor directly to your mission. That's what you are about as a mid or major gift fundraiser. Your job is to be the bridge between the donor's passions and interests and all the great programs and projects your nonprofit has to actually change the world. That's your job. And so that's what you need to be doing. All right, now I'm going to actually look at some real data, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. If I can bring that up.
Just a quick comment. Thank you all for your great questions in the Q&A box. Keep them coming. And we know that if you're thinking the question, probably someone else is. So thank you all for your great questions so far. I'll ask Jeff those questions here in a little bit.
Okay. All right. You know, the new Zoom stuff is throwing me off.
Yeah, it takes a minute.
Okay. Here's an actual analysis we did from one organization looking at 1,000+ cum level giving. So for this organization, they had 7,266 donors that gave 1,000+ cum in any one of these years that we have here, from 2017 through really 2020, because 2021 was year to date. And you can see, bottom line, this organization grew from 7.3 million to 10.5 million during that time period. From 2017 to 2020, they grew 44%. So they're feeling pretty good about that overall growth, about 10% growth per year. Well, then we broke it out by individuals, organizations, and foundations. Now, when we did that and we looked by class year, meaning this is the year that those donors hit that level. So in 2017, they had $5.7 million in revenue from donors that gave 1,000+ cum. Those same donors by 2020 were now giving 3.9, or we lost 32% of their revenue, their value from that time period. Then we had more donors come in 2018. These were different donors who hit the 1,000 cum mark at 2.4 million. By 2020, they were only giving 1.4, or we lost 43%. Then the class of 2019, 2.3 million. And by 2020, 1.4, we lost another 38% of value from that group. And then they had organization revenue and foundation revenue, which was pretty small. But overall, over that time period, between 2017 and 2020, they lost $4.1 million to value attrition. Even though they grew by 44%, they lost $4 million there. $4 million. So they were both stunned, but also like, yeah, I could see how that happens, because we know we're not holding on to donors well enough. So then we looked at, okay, well, how does your organization look? We did a pipeline analysis. And this is looking at this organization, and you can tell something very amazing about this organization. One, they have 500,000 donors in total giving of almost $50 million. Okay, large organization. What do you notice about this? Most of these donors are in the small giving category. There are 406,000 donors giving less than $100 to this organization. Now look, at the 500 to 999 group, there were 8,600 donors giving 5.5 million. And then right underneath the $1,000 donors to 4,099, giving 4,173 donors, giving 6.7 million. And then look at this clog. Look at this big clog. At the 5,000 to 99, only 175 donors. So what does this tell you about the organization? One, there are a number of clogs in this pipeline. That's one thing. But if you look around the mid and major gift area, there is a huge clog here of donors that are sitting in that 1,000 to 4,099, 500 to 99, that are just sitting there. They're not moving them up. What was the deal? They had a very small major gift program and no mid-level program at all, but they had a very robust direct response program bringing in small donors. Okay? So this organization was just ripe to build a mid and major gift program. In fact, when we did a forecast, we noted they could grow from 10 million, what was the total? $10 million, 10.4 million to $39.5 million by the end of year 5 if they boosted their major gift program and their mid-level program. You can see major gifts would grow to 1.1 million to 4.4 million, and mid-level would go from 3.1 million to 22.5 million. This is because they had so many donors in this category of mid-level that they just were doing nothing with. And fortunately, they decided to hire us, and we worked with them, and we helped build out a complete mid and major gift strategy. And, you know, we projected by end of year 5 that they would be at almost $40 million. And I can tell you that by the end of year 4, they grew to $75 million. So our forecast, which they originally thought was pretty aggressive, was actually super conservative. And we find this over and over again. If an organization actually is dedicated to providing a structured mid and major gift program, this is what can happen to your file. So this is just one sample of an organization that came to us, what we're able to reveal in the data, what the data told us, and what they were able to do. And the other great thing about it is that we were able to show them, hey, you have the donors to hire people. And they did. And they were able to do that based on that. So that was an amazing client to work on. And let me just bring up something else we want to share. All right, we are now back in the PowerPoint. So the goal here is really to create a fundraising system and strategy that helps donors give to their capacity. That's what we're trying to do here. And so you need to ask yourself, are you looking at year-over-year growth of your existing donors, not just new people coming in? Are you accounting for the impact of the new money on your overall net revenue? And what is your rate of promotion from mid to major gifts? And I can tell you this, what we have found in the data is that for organizations who have no mid-level program whatsoever, organically, donors in the mid-level range move into major gifts at a 0.02% rate. So very few. But when you have a very robust major gift program, anywhere between 3 and 4% of those donors move up into major gifts. Now, another thing is, are you evaluating this donor attrition and donor value attrition for your file? Because if you aren't, you're not looking at the full picture. Now, how can you assess your own donor pipeline? You can go to your database, go to your database director, who's ever looking at that, and select any donor who gave $1 or more of any of the last 4 calendar years or year to date. And for each donor, export the following: donor counts, cumulative giving totals, and average gift amounts, and put the information in the giving ranges chart below. This is what it looks like. This is that same chart I showed you. But you want to see this. You want to be able to look at where are the clogs in your donor pipeline so that we can look at that and create strategies to unclog those donors and move them into major gifts as easy as possible. Okay, so really a healthy mid and major and planned giving program really happens when the functions of donor acquisition and cultivation are fully functioning and effective. So in this case, in that organization I showed you, they had a great acquisition program and cultivation. What they weren't doing is trying to move those donors up. And that's where we identified the problem. So what does a healthy organization look like? Well, everyone at the organization sees the donor as a partner and as part of the mission. Go back to the very beginning when I said your donors are as part of your mission as the thing that you're doing that changes the world. Gift officers seek out and learn the donor's passions and interests authentically. They're trying to figure out what makes that donor tick. Why do they love your organization? What part of it that they love, so that you can match them up with all the beautiful things that you're doing. And that you have a system that's been created to allow the donor to reach that potential. And the organization and gift officers, again, promptly report back on the impact. I've said that now 3 different times, reporting back on impact. So we would love to conduct this data assessment and do that for you. And we do that for free. And you ask, well, why does Veritus do this for free? A couple of reasons. One, we want you to have good information about how your donors are actually performing, not just year over year, how you're doing year over year. We want to know what's that donor and donor value attrition rates. And the other is it allows us to get in front of you to show you what's going on, where there's areas of opportunity for you to grow, where you could be in 5 years, and how Veritus could help you. And I want to tell you this, there's no obligation to work with us at all. We want to get you this information. And if your file is big enough to be able to do the assessment, we want to do it. And we'll do it for free and sit down with you and show you what is available in your database. So it's possible you can do that yourself. We give you the instructions to do it, but we provide it for free and for any organization that will qualify. We only require a simple data pull and no identifying donor information. And we are very secure with our data. And this is what you would get. You'll get an analysis of your donor value attrition over the last 5 years. You get a breakdown of donor value attrition for individuals and organizations, a 5-year revenue projection for mid and major gifts, that CLOGS report that I showed you, and then recommendations on the number of MGOs and mid-level officers your data actually supports. So I would love for you to all scan this, take advantage of this. This will be one of the best things your organization can do to at least shed light on where your donors are and how they're behaving. Karen, this is a great time now for questions. What do we have?
Thank you. Thank you. I got lots of good questions from Anne. Can you suggest key metrics that nonprofits should be tracking to ascertain donor-based health?
The ascertain donor-based health.
Health. The
Health.
health.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, donor retention, value retention, the 2 things. You want to look at number of gifts per donor. You want to look at your average gift, and you want to look at it by where are they in the relationship with you? For example, how are new donors performing versus second year from new donors versus core donors who have been with you 2 to 3+ years? You want to look at all those areas, like what are their retention rates versus this group and this group? How many donors from lapsed are being renewed from lapse or reactivated? Or deeply lapsed, how many of those are you reactivating? Those all give you an overall health view of your complete donor file so that you can address those areas that are lacking and provide strategies to help boost that up.
Thank you. From Natalie, I think this is really what do we mean by lost revenue? So when calculating value attrition from donors at a specific giving level, 1,000 CUNE, for example,
Yeah.
you count it as lost revenue if they give less than 1,000 in year 2.
Yeah, their value is gone. So they're giving 1,000 and next year they give 500. We lost $500 in value from year 1 to year 2. So we didn't lose them as a donor, but the question is why? Why did the donor go from 1,000 in year 1 to 500 in year 2? What was the reason? Now, here's another beautiful thing about major gifts and what we do with our clients. We know in every file, every donor portfolio that we work with, and right now we work with over 200 mid and major gift officers. So that's 200 portfolios that we're working with them on. At the end of the year, when we're doing our reports or by quarter, if anyone's underperforming or overperforming, we know exactly why. And in mid and major gifts, you should be able to know that.
All right, from Jen, does the cum that Jeff is talking about include any sort of transactional donations like event tickets? And then also from Diana, does this free assessment apply to a membership model structure? So I think, that's a kind of, the
Yes.
membership folks and the tickets. So let's talk about
We
that.
would track all revenue, right? But we have a questionnaire with the data that will ask you different things like, how many events do you have per year? What are your sources of revenue so that we can tell, like, oh, you're an organization that's really heavy membership. You're an organization that's really heavy events or you're an organization that is really heavy on direct mail or email. We ask that because that does give us a broader picture of what's going on with your file.
Thank you. Natalie also says, how do you calculate rate of promotion from mid to major gifts?
So how we do it is we're tracking, let's just, for example, we have an organization that has 3 mid-level officers with roughly 600 donors in each portfolio. So that's 1,800 donors in their mid-level program. And we're tracking, of those 1,800 donors, what percent of those donors are moving into a major gift portfolio per year. And when we've now tracked this for almost about 10 years for mid-level. And what we're finding is, on average, with a really good program, anywhere from 3 to 4% is usually what we see moving into major gifts.
A couple of folks here, and I'll answer this one, Jeff. What is the minimum requirement to do the assessment? It's at least 500 donors giving at least 1,000 or more in a given year. So we look at the last 4 years. Yeah. We need at least 500 giving at least 1,000 in one of those years, just to help you all. Yeah. We need at least that many donors to really put this together.
Yeah.
All right. So Jill's asking, what is standard growth percent goal over average year over year for overall growth? Talk a little bit about what's normal growth.
Well, that really depends on your organization. I mean, it depends. If you're a new organization, you should be seeing higher revenue growth year over year. If you're a long, old, established organization, depending on how you've been growing and what's potential, it could be anywhere from 5 to 20%. It really depends on, how old your organization is, how long you've had your donors, what have you been doing to currently cultivate those donors. For example, you could be having 5% growth every year, and you have major donors, but you're not actually asking donors for gifts. Well, then you now introduce a major gift officer and you're asking for gifts, you could see 40% increase. I mean, we saw that with a large nonprofit that we had that's been around for over 40 years. And they had a major gift program, but they weren't really asking donors for gifts. We go in there and we start actually asking the donor, and they grew by 44% in the first year that we worked with them. It was phenomenal. And it was just because there was all this pent up, desire from the donors to give because they were finally being asked.
So Jill says, what are some indicators that you are not ready to hire someone in mid or major gifts? And then talk a little bit about, in the assessment, how we speak to number of fundraisers.
Yeah, that's a good question. It would depend on the number of donors and the value of those donors. So when we start a major gift program, we like to see the value, the starting value, and the cost to cultivate something like a 2 to 3 to 1 right away. That usually isn't that hard. That means that if you hire a major gift officer and you start with like 300,000 in total revenue from that portfolio, that's a good place to start. But then we want to quickly see over the next 4 years that move into 6 to 8 to 1. So it really is how many donors, what's the total value of the potential major gift portfolio that we would determine if you were able to actually hire a full-time. Sometimes you're too small and you might hire a hybrid major gift mid-level officer because you might have 50 donors in a major gift portfolio and maybe 300 in a mid-level portfolio that you have one person cultivating. Or you might not even be big enough at all for that, and you might have to get in it and do it yourself as the development director, which a lot of organizations have to do because they're small. Well, that's when you have to determine how much of your time can you spend on that portfolio or major gifts. If it's 10%, I'll tell you this, if you have 10% of your time on major gifts, you can work with 15 donors because a full portfolio for a full-time person is 150 donors. If you only have 10%, you can only work with 15 donors reasonably. But it's 15, right? So it doesn't matter how big or small you are, even if you're tiny, even if you can just work with one donor, you can have a major gift program. You can have a mid-level program. You got to allocate your time correctly.
So, kind of along that line, Sarah's asking, do you have any recommendations on systems that enable an easy way to track impact? And we talked about how we don't tell donors how they're making a difference. Like, how do we track that? How do we get a systematic way to stay on top of everything?
This is where you need to sit down with your program team who's actually doing the programs and sit down and say, how do you track if what you're doing is effective? What are the tools you use? How often are you reporting on that? You may not know this, but they are tracking these things, but they're not communicating that to the fundraising team or anyone in communications because they don't know to. So sitting down with finance and with program and sitting at the table and going, how can we track the effectiveness of what we're doing so that we can tell donors what's actually happening so that I can report back to them at least once a quarter or at the very least once a year, what's happening in our programs. We need to do this.
All right. Mark says, for a mid-level program of 600 donors, how often in 1 year should we plan to ask for a donation? Once a year, 3 times a year?
I like to say at least twice per year. We've been actually talking about this internally, but the majority of your time with mid-level is really stewarding these people, cultivating them, but at least twice a year, because they're still being solicited in the direct response program. In mid-level, you're not taking them out of the program at all from the direct response program. So they are still being solicited. And so even without asking for a gift, personally, one-to-one, we see that mid-level programs grow because somebody's talking with that donor and then they give more through the direct response program. But in addition to that, I would recommend 1 to 2 times per year doing a solicitation that the mid-level officer is asking of the donor. And there's all kinds of different strategies around that. Obviously, during the fall or holiday time, that's a great time to ask, or to piggyback on something that's been out in the mail and just asking the donor, hey, did you see that thing in the mail? I'm asking if you would consider a gift. Last year you gave $500. Would you consider giving a gift of $750 this year? So those are the kind of solicitations from the mid-level area that we like to see.
So quickly in the assessment, we're looking at mid-level major gift, foundation, corporation. Who all are we covering in that process?
All donors, all those donors. So individuals, organizations, foundations, if that's all in there, we will track it and we'll show you the revenue from those donors.
So a little bit more about the clog. What does that clog look like? Like, talk about the clog. What's that mean? What's happening? We showed it, but sometimes it takes a minute. I know it took me a while to understand the slide myself. So
Okay. So let me show you again the really big clog here in this donor file. 1,000 to 4,099. This organization had 4,000 donors that gave that amount, that gave $6.7 million. Okay. The next level down, the 5,000 to 9,000, there were only 175 donors. So it went from 4,000 donors giving at the 1,000 to 499 level down to 175. That is a clog. Like you want to see more of those donors,
flowing through the drain. They're
rolling
getting
through the
stuck.
drain. And so
Okay.
something's preventing those donors from giving bigger gifts. Now you can say, well, they just don't want to give more. Or, and that's true for some of them, but for the vast majority, and you look at the strategies, this organization didn't have a mid-level program. So those donors who are giving that $1,000 range, um, they were not being cultivated by anyone except through direct mail. And so that's just what they were giving every year. And so that's why they only had 175 donors. And then you can see from the next level, 82, and another clog. It went from 82 down to 12. Now, this is pretty stark. And usually, obviously, you see less and less donors giving at these higher levels. But this is what you want to identify. You want to try to release as many down here so they can start giving more. And usually it starts with just asking a donor to do more and challenging to give more.
Got lots more good questions. What are top qualities and experiences of a successful major gift officer?
The top qualities, curiosity is number one. If a person is curious, that means they're going to be asking donors why they give. What prompted this? Tell me about your story. They'll know what they care about, why you've been giving, what are the programs you love that we can. So being curious is number one. Being persistent is another one. Being patient. Those are three qualities. Really being able to be a good listener. Somebody that's able to facilitate conversations. You notice that I didn't say, oh, they're just like a really good closer. No, all those things, those attributes I talked about, if they really put those into play, the close will happen. It really will, especially if they use our permission-based asking, Karen, because it's really about leading that donor through a conversation. And if you're good at listening and facilitating that conversation, you'll get to an answer that most likely you'll want it. You'll love because you've done all the good work and able to really care about that donor. And the other thing is that you're in this work to help that donor find joy in their giving. So if you have a heart that really wants to help donors find joy in their giving and you love the mission of your organization, you're going to be great.
Great. Leanne said she can feel your passion through the screen, Jeff.
Good.
Oh, he's got his hands like this.
I know.
He's in it. I'll do one more question very quickly. If you don't have a mid, major, or planned giving program, where do you start? Do you do them all at once? What would you recommend as a priority?
Yes, I would start first with developing a major gift program. So look at what you think is a major gift, and you would be able to do that by analyzing your data. Maybe it's 1,000 cum or above. Maybe it's 5,000. Maybe it's 250. You're a small organization. You can start there. That's where you will have the most leverage. And if you establish that major gift program, then you have a place for mid-level to go. And then as you start that major gift thing, you'll also want to start looking out and hearing for donors around their estate and planned gifts. That's very underutilized. And if you can start building that up and start asking donors about what legacy they want to live or give and leave behind and start having those really good conversations and building that, you right today will leave a lasting legacy for your organization, because all those organizations that 10, 15 years ago really did a good job in identifying planned giving donors and soliciting them for a planned gift are reaping the benefits every year right now. And so your organization will be able to do that 10 to 15 years from now.
Thank you, Jeff. This was really exciting. Thank you all for being with us today for this presentation. As a reminder, you'll receive a recording of this webinar and copy of the slides via email by tomorrow. And if you're ready to get started with your free assessment, go ahead and use the link on the screen here. You can also reach out to my colleague, Amy Chapman at achapman@veritusgroup.com. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff, for all of your enthusiastic and fascinating presentation. I've heard it many times and you still make it interesting. Thank you all for joining us, and come back and join us again in the future.